everyone who understands the position, I want to say it loudly and clearly that talking about immigration is not racist. We welcome those like Mr Syed Senior who arrive legally and respect our freedoms both of speech and religion, those who want to work hard to build a better future for their families, those who cherish democracy, equality and the rule of law. It is also not racist to recognise that our country has failed in its fundamental duty to control its borders. Too many have come here illegally or have overstayed their welcomes, and too many are here not to give but to take. And too many don't share or even actively oppose our country's values. It is also not racist to say that we should remove foreign killers, paedophiles and rapists from our country. And it shouldn't be said, but it's not racist to say that countless women have been trafficked and enslaved into prostitution by evil criminal gangs. And it is not racist to want to stop the boats, a treacherous trade that claims lives and enriches gangsters. I'll take one more intervention from Mr Stewart.
Kevin Stewart.
I thank the member for the intervention, but language and rhetoric is very important in this debate. And what we have heard from Robert Jenrick is not good, as far as I'm concerned. And trying to brand all immigrants as being criminals is wrong too. Does the member accept that?
Russell Finlay.
I'm not even going to waste my time attempting to address that point, because the members needs to open his ears and listen up to what's actually being said. Concerns are increasing in many Scottish communities. People can see that uncontrolled immigration is unsustainable. People know that foreign criminals should be sent packing. That is not an extreme position, but the views of ordinary mainstream Scotland, of sensible Scots who increasingly struggle to understand an out-of-touch left-wing political class. People can see that unfettered immigration places increasing pressure on public services. Taxpayers who work hard but struggle to pay the bills while seeing local services decline. They understand this. And listening to SNP politicians criticise Scots who are concerned about immigration of politicising the saltire was surely the day that irony died. And to attack this debate, as I suspect many will probably do, will only serve to confirm how out of touch they really are. So let me say it again, loud and clear. The people in Scotland who have concerns about immigration are not racist. It is not racist to reject alien attitudes towards women or gay people. It's not racist to oppose cultural practices like child marriage. It's not racist to expect or want immigrants to assimilate. It is, however, foolish and naive to nurture the idealistic notion that all immigration is good and welcome. Yet in Scotland today, that is where many left-wing politicians appear to stand. Some of them want open borders, some are blind to the misery of trafficked people, and some think it's fine for migrants to leave a place of safety, such as France, to reach our shores. Well, we, the Scottish Conservatives, think differently. We believe that illegal migration is causing strain in our local communities and on our nation's finances, and that's why I endorse Kenny Badenoch's plan to withdraw from the ECHR and to deport those who do come here illegally. This is the only credible way in which we can again take control of our borders, and these views are basic common sense. These conversations are held around dinner tables, at football grounds, in community centres and pubs. I see the impact of mass migration on my home city of Glasgow, which now houses more asylum seekers than any other local authority in the UK. Now, once an asylum seeker is granted leave to remain, they gain refugee status, and at that point they are the responsibility of the local council, who are required to house them, but only if they are categorised as priority need. However, the SNP abolished the priority need criteria in 2012. This means that every single homeless refugee is entitled to a home in Scotland, And in addition, in 2022, 10 years later, the SNP abolished what's known as the local connection rule. And this means that those with refugee status don't need to have any local connection whatsoever to seek housing. Now, both of these decisions, both of these SNP decisions, has resulted in Scotland generally and Glasgow specifically becoming a prime destination. This is a city, I'm sorry, I don't have any time remaining, a city that declared a housing emergency 2 years ago, a city with a mountain of debt standing at £1.6 billion and rising. Little wonder the council leader, Susan Aiken, has suggested a pause on asylum seeker dispersals to Glasgow, while her SNP colleague concedes the existing system risks damaging social cohesion. So I end by saying it loud and saying it clear. The Public First cannot afford this. It's unsustainable. This is not racist. It is not far right. It is simply right. Thank you. I move the motion in my name.
Thank you. I now call on Mary McCallum to speak to and move Amendment 19252.5. Up to 5 minutes, Cabinet Secretary.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. Now, I can't say that I am pleased to open this debate for the Government today. Only 4 weeks ago, the Conservatives brought a similar motion, and that day a number of contributions crossed the line. And it's taken the biscuit today, frankly. So let me start by appealing for care in the language that we use this afternoon. Whatever certain politicians do to characterise the situation, we are talking about people, people with hopes, people with aspirations, people who have suffered, human beings who should be treated with dignity and respect. Now, let me promptly address what are flatly errors in the Conservative motion. Firstly, they wilfully misuse the terms illegal immigration and asylum seekers, conflating two fundamentally different issues. The term illegal migrant is not only divisive, dehumanising, it's also inaccurate. People are not illegal. Seeking asylum is a right, and in fact, it's the lack of safe routes to do so to the UK which makes people take irregular presentations. I'm not giving you one more second of
to the Chair, Cabinet Secretary.
Secondly, they misunderstand the rules on local connection. So let me explain it to them. The changes made in November 2022, they only prevent a Scottish local authority from referring a homeless household to another Scottish local authority in which they have a local connection. And this was praised as giving homeless households the choice that anybody else would expect. The change did not alter local connection rules for refugee households, and as things stand, there is nothing preventing a Scottish local authority from referring a refugee homeless household back to parts of England and Wales in which they have a local connection. I've already been made clear I'm not giving the Conservatives one more moment of a platform on my watch. So they are wrong. They know they're wrong, and they really ought to stop spreading the mistruths. Now, there are pressures on our housing system, Presiding Officer, driven not least by pressures on households in our economy after years of Conservative chaos in Whitehall. The truth is that Mr Finlay's party allowed enormous asylum backlogs to build up, whilst creating a hotels policy which allows people to languish. Now a Labour government is continuing to move through these applications far too quickly and without proper provision for settlement. In particular, I appeal to the UK Labour government to implement proper move-on periods which do not create homeless refugees, and for the process to be properly funded. Scotland has some of the most protective anti-homelessness laws of any country, and added to this, we have significantly added to this with the Ask and Act duties, which the Parliament has now just voted for in the Housing Scotland Act. We've also delivered more than 140,000 affordable homes in our time in government, but there is housing strain, Presiding Officer. But what I can say with absolute certainty is that in the face of a housing emergency, this government will not be rolling back on the homeless right of a single person in Scotland. So whilst continuing to ignore the Conservatives' attempts for a greater platform, I want to turn in closing to reflect on what has led us here, to this right-wing nonsense finding itself in our national parliament for the second time in a month, to mistruths in social media, read by thousands before we have the chance to correct them, to politicians, journalists, institutions repeating and thereby normalising unfounded suspicion, fear and hatred that should never be normalised. This is all happening to the extent now that what we once knew as bigotry is now defended as free speech. Well, the SNP know what it is, Presiding Officer. We recognise what it is. We will call it what it is. It is prejudice, it is intolerance, Presiding Officer, it is racism. It is all of these things. It is all of these things because it has no basis whatsoever in fact. Conflating crime with migration, as the Conservatives do in this chamber, is simply not factual. Holding whole populations to account for the criminal actions of one individual is patently absurd. Suggesting that the far right are somehow defenders of the rights of women and children is utter nonsense. And now, in closing, Presiding Officer, we predictably have Russell Findlay following Kemi into leaving the ECHR, making the UK, alongside Russia and Belarus, as the only ones not signatory. The ECHR promotes the rule of law, the protection of individuals. It represents the difference between barbarity and civilization. It says you have rights by virtue of being human and being human alone, and we should be suspicious of anyone who tries to drag us from it.
Presiding Officer, this motion is one of the most shameful pieces of political theatre we have seen in this chamber for some time. It is a motion steeped in cruelty, ignorance and xenophobia. It attempts to pit neighbour against neighbour, to scapegoat refugees for a housing crisis that is the direct result of decades of political choices made by UK Conservative and other governments that have imposed austerity, underfunded public services, deregulated housing and allowed landlords and developers to profit while ordinary people struggle to find a safe home. Let us be absolutely clear. There is no such thing as an illegal human being. Seeking asylum is a human right, protected by international law. Russell Findlay would do well to remember that, by the 1951 Refugee Convention, which the UK helped to draft and is legally bound to uphold. No. People fleeing persecution, war and disaster do not lose their humanity when they cross a border. They are exercising their right to seek sanctuary. Yet this Tory motion treats them as a problem to be stopped, as if people escaping conflict and trauma are somehow responsible for the state of Britain's public finances or local housing systems. What a grotesque distortion of reality this is. We know why people are coming here. Many are here because of wars and crises that the UK has helped create or fuel through its foreign policy, through arms sales, through decades of imperial intervention that have destabilised regions and destroyed lives. To now turn around and demonise those very people for seeking safety is the height of moral hypocrisy. Scotland has long prided itself on being a place of welcome, a country that believes in compassion, solidarity and justice. New Scots have contributed so much to our culture, our economy, our NHS, our universities, our communities. Refugees are doctors, carers, teachers, artists, friends, family members. They enrich our nation in every possible way, every single day. The Conservatives' attempt to connect the suspension of local connection rules to the so-called unsustainable levels of asylum seekers in Scotland is both dishonest and divisive. Let's remember why those rules were suspended: to make sure that people experiencing homelessness could access accommodation wherever they were, without being trapped by bureaucratic borders. It was an act of fairness, of solidarity. It prevented people from being abandoned in crisis simply because of an administrative line on a map. If Scotland is seeing rising homelessness, that is because of Westminster's austerity, Scotland's constrained housing budgets and a failure by successive governments to build public and affordable homes. It is because housing has been treated as a commodity, not a human right. So let us also be clear that the so-called hostile environment, a policy deliberately designed to make life unbearable for immigrants, has directly forced thousands into poverty, destitution and homelessness. That cruelty is not accidental, it is intentional and it is shameful. And it is also the logical outcome of Tory ideology. An ideology that dehumanises immigrants and blames them for problems that stem from decades of political failure in this country. Presiding Officer, this Parliament should stand up today and reject this motion outright. We must refuse to be dragged into the gutter of xenophobia. We must insist that our response to global displacement be one of humanity, dignity and shared responsibility. Instead of building walls and stirring fear, let's build homes. Let's build communities that are strong because they are compassionate, inclusive and just. That is what Scotland can and must be.
It is important to say is that asylum seekers, migrants, illegal migrants, whatever terminology you want to use, all of them are people. And I don't think we heard that once from Russell Finlay earlier on. They could be my brother, my sister, my sons, my mother, my father. They could be me. In any other circumstance, that could be any one of us. But we are dehumanising every single one of them when we use this generalised language and this exaggeration. And Russell Finlay knows that that is the truth. And that's why he's refusing to engage in the substance.
Presiding Officer, this is a really difficult debate, and the premise of it is wrong, absolutely wrong. It reeks of hypocrisy and opportunism. Mark Griffin said that the Conservatives were using this for their own ends. It was the Conservatives that collapsed the asylum system and spent £700 million of our money, of taxpayers' money, to deport only 4 volunteers. And once again, they're trying to sow division and conflate illegal immigrants with asylum seekers and refugees, blaming these groups for draining public service coffers. In reality, those groups, like foreign nationals who have been trafficked and abused or are here without any legal status, are often left without help, without a safety net. And they are people with no recourse to public funds, and I don't have time to take an intervention. It seems to me that when things go wrong, the first response of those who should actually be taking a share of the blame is for them to deflect and to blame somebody else. Our grandparents fought wars to stop the rise of nationalism and discrimination. It surely can't be hard to see the parallels with that to what is happening today, where foreign nationals, and within that mainly people of colour, are being blamed for the crisis we face. And while our grandparents fought those wars, the people left at home provided asylum and refuge for those being persecuted. Yes, there is a housing crisis, but it is not the fault of asylum seekers. It's the fault of government decisions. It's about a lack of investment from the last Tory government, who now have the brass neck to take forward this debate. It's about the lack of investment from the SNP government, who squandered capital rather than invest in homes. And there is no doubt that the SNP have fanned the flames of a housing emergency because of their failure to meet their own house building targets. And that's especially the case in rural areas. And on top of that, there are cuts to council funding to public services. And they're the real cause of the challenges we're now facing today.
So much at the moment. We are several years into a cost of living crisis. And I think there is consensus, though, that, and I've tried to work this very carefully, there are far too many asylum seekers living in hotels. But this is where we differ. Firstly, I think there is a very easy way to reduce the number of asylum seekers, and that is to process their applications quicker and better. It has the knock-on effect that it allows folk the chance to start rebuilding their lives, to get jobs, to find a community to settle in and become a part of. And it also means that they're not spending months or even years in hotels. I don't blame the people who are fleeing war and persecution for claiming asylum. I don't think upholding international law or showing compassion is a bad thing. And I don't think asylum seekers are the ones responsible for every problem in society today. I usually blame that on the Tories, and I think I'm usually right on that. Right now, the whole asylum system is broken. I blame the Tories for breaking that too, by the way, although I think Labour could be doing a better job at trying to fix it. There has been far too little resource available to process applications for years, and losing the Dublin system to Brexit made that worse. Brexit, of course, being the gift that just keeps on giving from the last time a UK government tried to appease Nigel Farage. The system is broken as a consequence of trying to save a few quid on decision makers. And now we are spending fortunes accommodating folk in hotels. And I can understand why folk are angry about that. But this is where I think this Tory motion is particularly disgraceful, because it is trying to turn that anger against some of the most vulnerable folk in the country. The divisive language and the misinformation here are outrageous. Seeking asylum is not illegal. It is a fundamental human right protected by international law.
Presiding Officer, over the course of this debate, we've heard some of the same tired, toxic rhetoric from the Conservatives. Language that tries to divide, to sow fear, and to cast desperate people as threats to our society. But the truth remains, people seeking safety are not the cause of our housing crisis, nor of our fiscal challenges. They are the victims of those crises. Crises created and perpetuated by the same Conservative governments who now want to wash their hands of responsibility. Russell Findlay listed things that he claims are not racist. But it is racist to blame an entire group of people for the issue his UK government created. It is racist to spread misinformation and cause fear and alarm by saying migrant gangs were going to murder children in schools. It is racist to spit on people in the streets just because of the colour of their skin. I have witnessed all of the above and more by Tories or other far-right groups in this chamber and on the streets of Aberdeen and Dundee, where I have been proud to stand in solidarity with other community members and anti-fascists against the racist anti-immigrant protests. Let's be clear, the lack of affordable housing in Scotland and across the UK is not caused by refugees. It is caused by decades of political neglect, by treating homes as investment vehicles for the wealthy instead of as places for people to live, by allowing rents to spiral and social housing to vanish, by cuts to local authority budgets imposed from Westminster that have hollowed out the very services that support people in crisis. If there is anything unsustainable here, it is the cruelty of a system that spends millions on detention, deportation and militarised borders, rather than on ensuring that every person, regardless of where they were born, has a safe place to call home. Scotland can do better. Scotland is doing better by choosing compassion over cruelty, inclusion over fear. The decision to suspend local connection rules was a decision rooted in fairness, to ensure that someone who found themselves homeless could seek help wherever they were, not be shunted between councils like a parcel no one wanted to open. That is not unsustainable, that is humane.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As we've heard today, language is incredibly important. We need to ensure that we are talking about the same issues and that we are using the correct terminology. Not doing so perpetuates the misinformation which some seek to weaponise against individuals and communities. I'm going to press on, Mr Findlay. I will take you if I have time. I would like to remind us of a few facts. So, people seeking asylum cannot access local authority housing. The asylum system and its operation is the responsibility of the UK government. The UK government has international legal obligations to recognise refugees who are in the UK. The purpose of the UK asylum system is to determine whether someone who is in the UK needs protection in line with those obligations. Only once the UK government has made a determination to grant asylum do newly recognised refugees have the right to access housing, to work and access other publicly funded support. As the Cabinet Secretary made clear, using the term illegal migrant is not only divisive and dehumanising, it is inaccurate. I will now turn to some of the contributions and reflect on as many as I can. First of all, I would emphatically reject the use of the term assimilation. This has connotations of having to either mask yourself or to mimic in order to fit in, rather than enabling cohesive multicultural communities. Presiding Officer, the days of ethnic minorities with strange names having to change their names in order to anglicise themselves and disguise themselves, the days of young Asian girls and black girls having to bleach their skin in order to fit in with white communities, those should be condemned and put into the history books. So I reject the term assimilation. We also have heard this willingness to tear up the ECHR in order to further demonise an already vulnerable group. So it seems that there are members amongst us who would be willingly throwing the rights away of every single citizen and person in this country in order to further demonise people who are already vulnerable. The EHRC is a fundamental principle of this Scottish Parliament, and any MSP that is worth their salt will resist that derogation in the strongest possible terms. I will also look at the facts. We were given facts. In 2024, the UK approximately had 948,000 long-term immigrants, primarily through work and study visas. 108,138, 108,138 claimed asylum, and of those, 35,000 arrived via small boats. So that is just 3.7% of the total long-term immigration in 2024. So it's important to remember those numbers. So we recognise that the current UK government inherited a broken asylum system and a backlog in decision-making with large asylum accommodation estate and people stuck in that system, and that reduces their ability to integrate and to be able to work. So this bottleneck in decision-making is the direct result of the Illegal Migration Act, a totally unworkable, unconscionable piece of legislation. It was never supposed to work, Presiding Officer. It was an attempt to control the headlines in an election year. Just as these continued debates in the Scottish Parliament aren't supposed to improve homelessness, they are an attempt to lower the bar of what is considered acceptable rhetoric in the run-up to next year's elections. Now, the Scottish electorate can see right through it. We're seeing people organising in their communities to stand up to the demonisation of people seeking asylum, and I have every faith that they will overwhelmingly reject this premise at the ballot box.